So yes, component did mount is called after the render method, and this is where you want to make API calls. Component did mount is what is called a lifecycle method that is built into React. It already exists, comes in React. You don't have to import it; it's just already here. There are several lifecycle methods that are built into React. And these lifecycle methods are executed at different points in the component's lifecycle. So what is a lifecycle of a component? So here's this little image. I showed you a couple of images, or one image yesterday. Here's one that is kind of outdated, but is still relatively relevant. So after it mounts, it will receive props. So it starts here. Should the component update? Will it update? Then it calls the render. Then did the component update? Will unmount? Will mount? And then did mount? And then will receive props. So this is okay. I don't really like this image. I like the other diagram that I showed you yesterday that shows you which lifecycle methods run at different points in the component's lifecycle. So on the initial mount of a component, when the component initially gets called, it goes into a constructor just because it's a class. And then if this get derived state from props exists, it will run this one. Then it runs the render. So the pre-commit save can read the DOM. So up here, this is when it's already visible, like on the DOM, visible on the screen. Then it calls component did mount. So these are mounting lifecycle methods. You can also read the documentation, component lifecycle, in mount in the initial mounting phase. These are the methods that are called in the following order when an instance of a component is being created and inserted into the DOM constructor. Get derived state from props, render, component did mount. These are old lifecycle methods that are no longer safe to use.
But Tom, quick question.
Yep.
So whenever there's a state change, the render function gets recalled, right?
Yep.
So if the render function gets recalled and then component did mount gets called and then it has a state change, how is it not going in the infinite?
So the question was change state. So state is one thing. Calls component did mount again. And then are you going to change state when the component did mount again?
I mean, I figured, yeah, right? Because doesn't like the way we've been coding it so far, component did not makes an API call and it sets state to whatever the API call or whatever data we get from it, right? So then if that's a state change, wouldn't it just keep?
Because the state might not always change. Yeah, you're making another API call, but the state is not necessarily changing. But like, it's an infinite loop.
Yeah, because like in component did mount, you're always calling
this
that state, right?
Sorry. Oh, so component did mount gets called, make an API recall.
Yeah.
Request to get all articles, set all the articles to state.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
So then, well then states change, right? So then wouldn't it re-render, right? Because it re-renders.
So then it re-renders again.
And then
so the component's already mounted.
Oh, and it knows that.
So up here, then it comes into here. So it's initially mounted, comes here, component did mount, update states, then it updates it. So because it re-renders, comes up here, then it goes through here. Should the component update? That's depending. And then did the actual component actually update?
Could be saying like if the API did the call and it had to change something, like if the data in the state changes, is that it like on the second API call? It doesn't go to an infinite loop because in the second API call nothing changes from the first time it did the API call. The state is exactly the same, so it's not going to do it a second time.
That's one thing, but in fact it's not actually updated.
Oh, this is weird because in component did mount, you're always setting state to the data.
Mm-hmm.
So I always figured even though it's the same data,
it would just keep on.
Yeah, it's still technically setting it.
Right. But no, it's actually, it should be an update part of that.
Okay.
It's already on the screen, it's already mounted, and then something, so yeah, so it wouldn't just be continually run the component did mount.
Okay.
But we will run into that, no, that was not. I want to confuse you. But yeah. So mounting is when the component initially renders onto the page, runs these, and then updating, say you change the state, then the component naturally updates again, runs the, if this exists, should component update, returns a Boolean value, we'll get into that, runs the render, and then component did update. And then if you want to get into very specifics about component did update, different parameters that these accept, but we'll get into that when we go through the live code section. Component did update, and then unmounting when the component gets removed from the DOM, say you go to another page, or you have a Boolean value that determines whether or not a component exists or not. Then it's like, then the component will unmount, what we call it. And what's unique about all these component lifecycle methods is they're only called in class components. So you can't use these in functional components. This is where like the original ethos of React is class components. That's where you set state, that's where you update state and everything. Functional components really initially did not have any. You couldn't create state functional components. So this is not going away.
Even with the
So yeah, you still can't use like lifecycle methods. However, there are other these things called hooks that we kind of been talking about that essentially accomplish the same thing as these lifecycle methods do. They just operate a little differently. We'll get into that. So let's. So we've already experienced component did mount, but let's actually go in and code from scratch what's actually going on. So I've got this basic my app scratch. Where is it? Where'd it go? There it is. So I've got this my app React app that just has app.js, and that's all it has. It doesn't have any additional components or anything like that. It's a class component. It's got this H1 called counter right now. I might use this or not. So in here, we want to go through some of the component life cycles, and let's do the initial mount. Let's go. So let's actually build a constructor. We can set state in there. Let's call render and component did mount on the initial mount. So constructor, props, super props, not necessary right now, I don't think. I could just do constructor this dot state equals count initial state is 0. I should give it null, and then in here, let's call this dot state dot count. Oh, constructor super call. Yep. Super. So null is showing up, like nothing's actually showing up in here. So in the render, let's console log just where render, so where render is being called. See right there, render is being initially called. Let's go into the constructor just to say console log constructor So constructor, then render. Now what's the next one? We have render. We're not going to worry about get derived state from props right now. Then component did mount. Component, not the catch. Component did mount is the most common one you'll probably end up using, and that's just console log component did mount. Let's look. So I'm refreshing constructor render component did mount. Everything kind of makes sense? Now, let's create something that will update the component. So what happens, how do we update the component? What needs to happen for the component to actually update? I need to make a state change. So how do I do that? We got button, update, state. And I'm going to create an onClick function. We just set this dot state dot counter count. Does that work? I don't know if that works. onClick. Oh, why isn't this working?
I think the brackets.
I actually call this that set state.
All right. Oh, yeah.
This dot state dot count equals. Wait, let's just set this is 0. Just for use this dot set this dot state dot count plus 1. Why isn't this working?
I don't think you need brackets, right? Because you're working inside JSX.
I don't need brackets like this.
And then I don't think you need count. You just can do this dot state dot count plus 1. So
Okay.
I mean, like,
Fine. I'm just gonna create it.
I think
no, you can just delete this dot state dot count.
This part?
I think
That's all you need.
set state only that it's object.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
That's what.
yeah. So it does need the bracket. I'm just gonna create it. That's it. Let's do it right now. Update state. This dot set state count this dot state count plus 1. And then here on click, I can just call this dot update state. Let's see if this works. There we go. Refresh. So I've got this update state. And so when I update the state, what methods should run? So updating the state in the current architecture of this component. So I don't have this in here. I don't have get drive state or props in there yet. I don't have should component update. I do have a render, and I don't have component did update yet. Let's render. So just the render should run, so we should only see console log render. Cool. But let's do component did update. See when this is bad. Component did update. And Not quite sure what component did update. It looks like it accepts the previous props in the previous state and a snapshot. Snapshot is if you get, what is it? Get snapshot. Yeah, we really ever have to use that. And you don't always have to pass in all the properties. So like component did update only has previous props in this example. Let's just call previous props, previous state, snapshot. Console log. Component did update. So I'm refreshing constructor, render, component did mount. Then after I update it, it should re-render, like render, and then component did update. It should show that. Render, component did update. And let's look at console log previous state. So if I click this, what will the previous state be? See if that's correct. Right there. So here you can do some like conditional logic. If it updates, do something else. You can also previous state, console log, current state, this dot state. So if I update it, render, component did update, the current state is 1, the previous state is 0. So that's one way to get that is
Automatic creating a snapshot. Or is this
let's look at it. Console log the snapshot. Snapshot. Snapshot is undefined, so you gotta like create the snapshot. I've never used snapshot before, so you don't even need to put that in there.
Is the hooks way of doing this? I know we're not going to get into it now, but like, is it, do you prefer one or the other? It's just different syntax. It provides all the same functionality.
Yeah. So the question was, is the hooks way of doing this in functional component? Is it?
Yeah, same. Like,
Is it
any
is it-
different or any like more complex? Do you favor one over the other?
I learned it using component like lifecycle methods. I learned the class way to do it, so it's easier for me to comprehend it. Like, oh, well, when it updates, it should just do X, Y, Z. So it's easier for me. So like, hooks are a new thing, and it's still new to me. But instead of in the place of like component did mount, component did update, component will unmount, it's all done in like one method.
Okay.
Component did update. Let's look at, let's create another component. Folder components. And do a counter.js. Ooh, that was a bad idea. Right. There we go. That sucks. Just want normal. We'll do that. We'll get rid of all this stuff right now. So here's another component called counter. set the counter. I'm trying to think of how this dot state. I'm just going to leave it like that, this for right now. Paragraph, counter, component. I'm going to import it to app.js, counter. Automatic came into here. Component did mount. I'm going to move all this stuff in the counter component. So I got this dot state, component did mount, console log, this dot state, and I'm going to move that button in here as well. This dot update state. So I'm pretty much just moving everything into. So I want to show you the unmount. So what happened there? And that's what happened. Oh, sorry. All right, we have counter, update state. Constructor app. We have the constructor app. Render, mount. Let's look at something. With the console log constructor in here, console log constructor counter. Actually, get rid of all that stuff. So constructor counter, component did mount. Let's bring in that console log in the render. If I get everything back. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. I just want to show you the unmounting. Split screens, just so we have. So in our app, we're just literally rendering the counter component, which was all the stuff that was originally in the app. Let's refresh. Constructor, the counter, the render, and the component did mount. Updated, re-renders, component did update, current state, count, previous state, count, that's one. Let's get rid of that. And now let's show unmount. So taking in props in this counter. So this dot state equals is mounted. And let's initially say the false. Actually, it's true. And in here, we'll render counter if this is mounted is true or false. So if is mounted is true, we'll render the counter. Right now, it's true, is mounted, not defined. This dot state that is mounted. So right now, counter is true. Constructor counter, render, component mount. But what if we had like a button that would make this false? So button, toggle mount. Let's call toggle mount. Well, this dot set state is mounted is opposite of this dot state dot is mounted. And then our button, while on click, this dot is mounted. But if toggle mount, on click. So right now it's mounted by toggle mount.
I think you called the wrong function.
Oh,
This toggle.
this dot toggle mount. So right now it's rendered. The counter is rendering, so it's coming in. Constructor component did mount. We didn't update yet. Let's see us update the state. Render component did update in the counter. Render again component did update. Now we can toggle mount and it exits. But so cool, whatever. But now we need to unmount. Oh, not component did update. Component will unmount when we're unmounting. Component will unmount is invoked immediately before a component is unmounted or destroyed. And we want to execute that method here. Component did unmount, or component will unmount, console log. Component will unmount. So they refresh. Constructor, counter, render, component did mount, updating it, component is updating. So it's re-rendering and the component did update. And then I'm toggling component will unmount. And I toggle constructor, so it's mounted again, brand new fresh, component that's mounted, update state, component's updating, toggle mount, component will unmount. There's another one. Let's see this. What's one we didn't talk about? This should component update. So should component update accepts two parameters, next props and next state. So should component update literally only returns a Boolean value, true or false, whether or not that component should update. So down here, should component update, previous props, previous state. If I save it, it's probably going to throw an error.
Next.
I didn't throw an error yet.
It's next. Next.
Oh, is it? Let's see. Oh, yep, you are correct. Next props. And next state. Update status. So I get like counter should component update return undefined instead of a Boolean value. So console log next props. Next props. See what that is. And next state. Next console log should component update. Let's refresh. So let's look at that diagram. So should component update, and it renders true, and if it returns true, then it calls render and it goes through the same thing. If it returns false, it doesn't re-render or anything. Nothing happens to the component. Let's look. So everything's initially mounted, component didn't mount, and now I'm going to update the state. It's going to go into should component update, and it's probably going to throw an error because I'm not returning anything yet. Should component update, next props is just an empty props because I'm not actually passing in any props. And next state is count with 1. So let's just return true. As you notice, not gonna work now. Let's want to get that error again. So I just counted log, so it's still not. Should component update is still going to not return anything. So when I update the state, I get an error, and look at the state hasn't updated yet because it's getting an error. Okay, what should I do? Should I or shouldn't I? So we can return true initially. So refresh, constructor counter, render, component didn't mount, and I update, then I update it again. That's props, next state. Any questions at this point?
So is maybe just a real life example, or is it kind of like a validation measure, or like a?
So the reason why should component update is in there is because if a parent component updates, all the child components will update or re-render. So if nothing in a child component, like if no data is actually changed in the child component that requires that would warrant an actual re-rendering, this is where you can do some logic. So I've got this state counter, so I'll do an example. So updating, cool, refresh, toggle mount. So component will unmount, and constructor. So we've got previous state. Oh wait, component will unmount. There we go. So in here you can do some logic like if this dot state dot count does not equal next state dot count, return true, else return false. Now this is always going to be changed, like always going to change, but we can do something with regards to like props. So let's pass in some props from our parent down to our child. Some prop. Return, what should this property be true? It's called just some prop is a Boolean value. We can pass in this some prop here. This dot state dot some prop. And now let's refresh. And now if we update state, oh, it's gonna throw it out. Let's return true, just so we're always updating it. As of right now, but we may change that. Update state. Next prop is true. It's actually console log. So I'm passing in props up here. Let's get rid of the state because I don't want to use that right now. I just want to deal with properties. Current props is this dot props. Let's just refresh it. See what happens. So when I update it, I'm gonna click, it's gonna come into here, should component update, and it's gonna decide what to do. Right now we have a default return true. So current props, some property is true, next props, true. Cool, that's fine. But let's create another button that updates that property. Update props. Update props. List that set state. Some props. It's going to set the opposite. New some props. Some prop, right? Did I miss something?
Oh no, it should component update. Should it be dependent on that some problem?
Should component update.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
So yeah, I just want to render update. So when I click this update props, it's going to set it to the opposite value true, so it's false. So if I can toggle it back and forth, and then it's going to come into here, should component update, it's going to render the current props and the next props. See right here, the current props, some prop is true initially, and then the next prop is false. So in here, dependent on some state in here, depending on property, I can say like if this dot props dot some prop does not equal next props dot some prop return true, else return false, or if they don't equal, I can just return false, just depending on some thing you want. So maybe I just don't want this to ever update when this property. So maybe when this property changes on this component, I don't want this component to re-render. However, I may want this component to re-render every time its state updates. So there's multiple ways to do it. So like right now, so I'm updating the prop on my parent component, but it's not changing it's not actually re-rendering this component. But whenever I update state, maybe I want to update that. Now I can toggle mount, will unmount, remount it. So what is component lifecycle? Again, just recap. When a component initially mounts, it goes into the constructor if you have it, then it goes into the render, and then it calls component did mount. This is where you're going to want to do most of your API requests. Anytime there's an update to states, or if you update a property and pass that property down to a child at some point, all the child components will update unless you tell it to or not. Right here. Comes into render, and component did update will be called. When you're unmounting, I don't think I've ever used unmount before. Oh no, I have. Those are like kind of edge cases where you use unmount. You'll kind of know when to, like, trying to update state on an unmounted component that might do something that might throw an error or like a warning, and then you'd have to use component will unmount, and then do something to it. But here is the basic lifecycle methods. Any questions? primarily you're going to be using component did mount and component did update. Any questions? All right, I'm going to stop the recording right there. I'm going to jump into React hooks. Kind of do the same thing, but use effect.